Although the original intention for Word documents was not to use columns, it can handle columns and it can change text into columns, just like a newsletter or a newspaper. Now, if we take our smaller document, which is the Access extract file, this is simply a single page extract from an Access manual, telling you what a database actually is, and we want to turn this into more of the newsletter type style, then we can create some columns. Now, in effect, we are already dealing with columns. It's just that we have one single column. If we want to change this document, all of it or part of it, into columns, then we simply need to highlight the text we want to change into columns and ask Word to change it into column layout. So if we highlight all the text except the title, so we start with the beginning of the first paragraph and then highlight down to the end, and we go to page layout, and you'll find there's a columns option which has a drop down arrow, and you can see there the default is 1. That's your normal document layout. But you can choose 2, 3, left, which is 2 but the left hand one is narrower, right, which is again 2 but the right hand one is narrower, or we can go into more columns and actually pick 1, 2, 3 left and right. These are the ones we see from the top, or our own number of columns. So the number of columns we just increment, and as you increment the number, you can see in the preview there are more columns listed, and in this little section here we can control the spacing between each column. Now at the moment the tick is in place so they're all equal, but if we remove that tick, you can then adjust columns so that some columns are wider than others, or the spacing between the columns is wider than others. Obviously that won't look too good if you start to make one column wider than another, so let's leave that as equal column width. We'll retain the 4 column setting, and then the other option here is to have a line between. If I click that there, you'll see there's a vertical line placed between each of the columns. That can be quite useful to help for reading as well, and it's going to apply to the selected text, or we can do the whole document, which will actually include my title, which I don't want to be squashed into columns, so let's leave it as selected text. OK, and the text that I've got now flows down the first column. Once it gets to the bottom of the first column, it then runs into the second column, flows down and then into the third column, flows down and then into the fourth column. If I then wanted to add some text, say for example after this first paragraph I wanted to add another paragraph, and databases are very useful for the storage of information on a computer system. Now you can see what's happening. It's pushing the other text down, which is causing it to go into the second column, which is causing some of it to go into the third and possibly the fourth, but it's also extending the height that we're using for the 4 columns. So everything stays in these 4 columns, it's just that the columns get slightly longer when you add more data in, more text. This is amazing and very, very clever. Now, if you happen to type so much in that these columns stretch to the bottom of the page, what will happen is we'll run into the second page with another set of columns. So we'll end up using column 1, 2, 3, 4, and then column 5 will be on page 2. So that's using columns in Word, converting current text to use those columns. Should you need to then amend what you have, we need to highlight all the text again, go back to the columns, and perhaps choose 3 as the default. And you can see the text is then spread across 3 columns. So that didn't quite highlight everything, and that column has gone a little adrift, so let's just do undo. Highlight everything. Columns, 3 columns. So they're equally spread across the page, with the text that is to fit in them equally spread across the page and down the page. Look at these 2 a little bit more to the left than the right columns, or a little bit more to the right than the left columns. Or into the column options, turn off the equal column width, and you can then control the width. In our case of 1 column and it controls the other, if I increment this, let's say 4 columns, equal column width, we can then start adjusting column widths. But notice that as I increase the width of column 1, it takes that extra width away from columns 2, 3 and 4. because you can't make it run wider than the page, so it has to get it from somewhere. So it gets the extra width that you're increasing to from the other columns on the page. So okay, this one has been widened and the other three have then been narrowed. So let's highlight all the text, columns, more columns, and you're into the columns dialog box where you can control the number of columns, the width of those columns, and the spacing between the columns, as well as having this optional line between to make things a little easier to read. So the spacing here is a little bit too tight because there isn't any. If I try to increase that for each of those, it will again take that spacing away from the widths because we only have the page width to play with. Okay, and that gives me some breathing space in the document with my still 4 columns in place. Should you need to revert a column layout back to, let's call it normal layout, then you highlight the text, go to columns and simply choose one column. And that will take you back to the default Word layout that you're normally used to working with, where you start typing on the left and it goes all the way to the right-hand margin before wrapping round.